All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're unpacking a really tense standoff between the United States and Iran. We're going to break down a pretty critical warning that came from then-President Trump and look at what the source material tells us about the high-stakes situation behind it all.
And this is the quote that started it all. It really doesn't get more direct than this. This statement from President Trump to Iran's leadership just cuts right to the chase and sets the stage for everything we're about to explore.
So first up, let's really get into this bold warning and the war of words that it basically kicked off between the two countries.
I mean, the exchange was just incredibly blunt. On one side, you have President Trump saying Iran is in big trouble and telling its leaders they better not start shooting. And the response? Iran's supreme leader was just as defiant, saying the republic would not back down and that Trump, just like other tyrants, will be brought down. You know, this wasn't quiet diplomacy. This was a very public, very direct showdown.
Okay, so this immediately makes you wonder, right? What was actually happening inside Iran that made the White House issue such a direct public warning?
And that's a great question, because it takes us right to our next section. What was happening on the ground? The voices coming from the streets of Iran, as it was described in the source.
The sheer scale of this was pretty huge. We're not talking about a few isolated incidents here. The source material, and this is citing then-Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, reports that active protests were flaring up in over 100 cities all across Iran.
And who was out there protesting? Well, the analysis suggests it wasn't just one group. It was this broad mix of Iranians. You had business people, students, seniors, even former government employees. The point being made is that this was a real cross-section of the entire society.
So, what was driving all of this? According to Pompeo's analysis, it really all boiled down to one fundamental frustration: the feeling that the Iranian people had been stripped of the basic economic means to just live a decent life and take care of their families.
Now, this leads us to a really central argument in the source material. Was this time different from other protests we've seen in the past? Let's take a look at the claims of a major policy shift. The source draws a really sharp line between two administrations based on what Pompeo was claiming. He argued that the Obama administration had, quote, refused to do anything, even speak out, during past protests. But in his view, the Trump administration, quote, took a different position, one that actively encouraged the people of Iran to get the government they wanted.
And the source points to what it calls actual tangible signs of change on the ground. Pompeo argues the situation was fundamentally different, and he cites these reports that regular army soldiers were actually refusing to fire on their own people. This, he claims, was forcing the Ayatollah to lean much more heavily on the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard, and even foreign militias to put down the protests.
This quote from Pompeo really just sums up his entire perspective. I don't know that he, meaning the Ayatollah, recognizes this is different, but the people do. The argument here is that the real change, the fundamental shift, had already happened with the people, whether the regime realized it or not.
Okay, so now the source zooms out. The argument is that this isn't just about what's happening in Iran. It's actually part of a much bigger global picture, a conflict being fought on more than one front.
The source even suggests we might be looking at a hinge point in history, and it does this by drawing a direct line connecting the protests in Iran with the crisis happening all the way over in Venezuela, two places that seem really far apart but are being presented as deeply connected.
So how are they connected? The source uses this very specific term, a narco-terrorist network. It's described as this long-running web that links Iran and Venezuela, and it's all built around the illicit trade of crude oil for cash as a way to get around international sanction.
And as Pompeo lays it out, this network has Iran and Venezuela at its core as partners in this oil trade. But then he brings Russia and China into the picture, describing this broader network of nations all operating outside of those traditional Western alliances.
So where does this all leave us? Well, our final section looks at the biggest unanswered question that the source raises: the connection between words and their very real consequences.
The whole argument in the source material seems to boil down to this idea of credibility. It suggests that the Trump administration's warnings had so much weight because there was, quote, work to be done in the background to deliver against that commitment. The idea is that these threats were seen as being backed by a genuine willingness to act.
And that leaves us right here with this one massive critical question. When you have a high-stakes standoff like this, one built entirely on public threats and red lines, basically a geopolitical game of chicken, who blinks first?